Hello, Physionic. I was asked a question on if I could cover lipedema. Learn your body, a science-based education. So if I'm completely honest with you, I didn't know much about lipedema, so I went ahead and read a few review articles, a few studies on what it is, how it presents itself, and that's what I want to take a few moments to discuss now. I've got my notes here. So lipedema is essentially, just as the name implies, lipid. It's essentially a redistribution of the fat. So our actual adipocytes, of course, contain lipids. They contain nutritional fat within them, and that's distributed relatively evenly across our entire body. Now, our genetics, of course, determine where we end up losing fat and things of that nature, and where that fat is actually distributed. Now, in about 10% of women, and this is an exclusive disease or pathology or just condition in general that affects only women, and they believe that it happens right around puberty or right after puberty with the introduction of particular hormones. Now, honestly, the scientific community does not seem to know a whole lot about it. So there's this redistribution of fat to the legs and arms to the point where they look extremely puffy, and that's because of the adipocytes are filling more there than they are in any other part of the body. And what's really strange about this is that it seems to be resistant to nutrition intervention as well as exercise intervention. So typically, and we know to a degree, of course, that if you go in a caloric deficit, of course, you'll lose body fat, but you can't necessarily tell your body, okay, I want to lose fat, in my cheekbone. It doesn't work that way. You're just going to lose fat in general across your body. Your genetics will determine some of how you end up, where you end up losing fat and things of that nature. So it's not too much of a surprise that you're not going to be able to lose fat exactly in those spots in your legs and in your arms, but those areas tend to be especially resistant in that particular pathology, to a point where you're losing fat in other areas. You might lose fat in your stomach, for example, but you would still retain all of that fat, or nearly all of that fat, in your legs and arms, where they tend to look puffy and large and edemic, or edema meaning a fluid buildup in a particular area, while your stomach would start to flatten out. Now, speaking on edema real quick, they did actually investigate if it is due to an increase in edema, so a water buildup in the legs and in the arms, and what they found is no, there's no actual difference. So it does seem to be a fat redistribution issue. They also measured if it was because of some sort of immunology, some sort of immune infiltration, when you can think of like the puffiness. Let's say you get bitten by a poisonous spider. I don't want to think about that, honestly. Let's say you get stung by a bee and you're allergic to it. Then you have this puffiness that tends to appear. Well, that's because immune cells are starting to infiltrate that area. And of course, you also have fluid buildup with the introduction of all these cells. So they thought that maybe it was because of that. And it turns out, no, again, does not seem to be an immune function issue. It does not seem to be a water fluid function issue. They simply don't know. They just know that there's a buildup of fat, and that fat does not get released readily from those adipocytes. The rest of your body has to sacrifice its fat instead of that particular area. Now, another symptom of lipedema is increased bruising and some general pain that can occur from those particular areas, again, the legs and the arms. And it seems to be a neural network that seems to get activated and tends to continue to send signaling to the brain to cause or sense pain. And again, they don't really know why. Yeah, to be honest, there's a lot of research that needs to be done on this particular condition. If that research will be done, it does seem like the research is starting to pick up in that area. But it is also known as the forgotten disease. because research has been incredibly slow or non-existent for the longest time. But now it's starting to pick up. So hopefully in the future, we'll know some of those causes as to why it's happening. I will link a review article, review study from 2018 that shows essentially the updated information on the disease. Now, in terms of treatments, they talk about massages, but honestly, massages probably don't do anything because you're talking about the adipocytes, and they do mention that in the review that most likely the massages are more a placebo effect than actually having any sort of drainage. Because with a massage, that typically can help with drainage if you have edema, if you have fluid buildup, but because that's not the situation with this pathology, it's not going to help. They also talked about liposuction. Liposuction does seem to have some benefit for these individuals, so that's something to consider. But of course, that's something far, far more drastic as well. So hopefully in the future, we'll actually have some treatments and hopefully some cures that will actually work and are far less invasive than liposuction. Unfortunately, that's all I've got for you. I wish that I had better news on that front, but I hope that this was at least somewhat informative, and I hope I have the pleasure of speaking with you in the next one. Have a good one, guys. See ya.